You're listening to another ambitious entrepreneur.network.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
This is Women in Leadership Podcast, featuring success insights from women around the globe. Now, over to your host, Anne-Marie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of Women in Leadership Podcast, brought to you by the Influence Alliance, the business building community for change makers who want to make a much bigger impact in the world with their message. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cross. Now, my guest today says every single conversation counts. Every one of them is the opportunity to learn about others, ourselves, and the world we live in. And joining me on today's show is Danielle Dobson. Danielle, she is a natural code breaker. She's curious, she's open and experimental, and she helps people to see, acknowledge, and build their personal agency. Well, that is what fuels her. She's a founder of her own business. She's a lead parent of 3 boys, and she brings her corporate experience, her inner detective, and her focus on human flourishing to her mission, which is to build more gender balance in the business world, in families, and across our communities. Now, specifically on today's show, Danielle is going to share why acceptance is the antidote to overwhelm and burnout. She's going to talk about how it is crucial to build our self-knowledge data bank, and work out what is at the core of who we are, as well as that our most valuable asset, guess what that is? It is our energy, and it's not our time. So all of this she's going to talk about today. Welcome to the show, Danielle.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Oh, wow. Thanks so much for that fantastic intro. Love it. Thank you.
Oh, look, I love everything that you stand for and what you're going to talk about today. But I just want to give you a bit of an opportunity just to share your background. It's always good to hear a little bit about the leadership background that you've had, and really what has been impactful that has led you down the journey to where you are today, sharing this message. So the floor's yours. Love to hear your story.
Oh, great. Wow. Gosh, it's one of those things. It's like, where do I start? I guess everything, like you mentioned, every conversation counts. Every opportunity and experience counts. And I guess the most impacting experiences that I had was when I was younger, being a code breaker, like you mentioned, playing AFL footy, advocating for girls wearing pants at school, not wearing a white communion dress for the Catholic sacrament when everyone else did. I think I wanted to not be like everyone else, but be liked by everyone else. And so that took me on all sorts of, I guess, adventures. I ended up working as a corporate accountant in finance from CPA to private practice in 5 countries in total. And that really helped me deepen my perspective of different people, setting up a home, building community in countries, and 2 of them were non-English speaking. So that really contributed. But I think the biggest thing that has contributed to exactly where I am today speaking to you is the research project that I conducted over 2 years, interviewing women who are leading at home and also, or leading at work, and also leading at home as lead parents. Because I was in that same situation myself. And I wanted to understand, what is it about being a professional working mother that's so hard? Where did all this pressure come from, and in the expectations? So I set about interviewing women who seem to be working well and doing it well in all their spheres. And I interviewed senior leaders in organisations, CEOs, CIOs, CFOs. I covered science, journalism, politics, not-for-profit, IT, engineering, petrochemicals, big boys for every kind of area. And I also interviewed a few men as well. And what I discovered was, completely life-changing. And that led to the book that I wrote, and then my work beyond that. So I think that was the biggest impact that I had, what I learned from that research project and the process.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said about, as a young child, breaking the rules. I recall we always had to wear uniforms, and this was at high school. I refused. I made my own uniform, and you know what? The teachers never said anything. I don't know why. I mean, I wore the colours, but it's just was different. And so my question to you, and it's interesting, I'm kind of thinking it's not that my parents actually ever said, break those rules, but what was it for you? Was that just something that your parents, did you see that happening in their lives? Why do we do it this way? Can we do it better? Tell us a little bit about what happened in your background that has nurtured it, because some of us can relate to what you've said.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I was just kind of thinking. Well, that's an awesome question, and I have thought about this a bit. Like, how did that happen? I'm the eldest girl and only girl of 2 boys. My mum was one of 6 brothers. She had a sister, and my mum, I guess, she was a code breaker too, but she was probably a frustrated code breaker. She wanted to break the code, but she was the eldest, and so her mother relied on her a lot, with 8 children. And so I think my mum wanted me to be able to, break the rules or be who I was. And then also I was in a very male-dominated environment. And the things that I was doing in my spare time were kicking the footy on the road with my brothers, playing cricket, riding bikes, being outdoors and connecting with nature, building cubbies, all of those sort of things. So I lived in the Yarra Valley in Victoria. So I think my parents and my mum in particular nurturing that kind of connection with nature and moving. And then also she is very strong on not allowing men and boys to take charge. So she encouraged that in me. And the interesting thing is she wouldn't be an advocate, and she never has been, but she's an incredible supporter for my dad with all of his advocacy things that he does, and she's supported me too. So she's played that brilliant support role, and I think that has given me the foundation and the courage to just think, well, why can't I play AFL? Why do I have to wear a dress? And that sort of nurtured that curiosity in me, like stepping back and saying, why is it like that? And can we do something different? Yeah. And I guess that's probably what it is.
Doing it, isn't it? And I think that's when you look at people who are kind of the rule breakers, it almost becomes like this. It's hard to describe because if it's just in you, but it's good to be able to share a little bit more, because, just because something happens a certain way doesn't mean that we have to follow. Why does this happen? We heard of that analogy where, a mother was teaching her child how to make, a roast, and she would cut off the sides of the roast in the pan. And one day her daughter said, "Why do we do that?" I said, "I don't know. We have to ask your grandma." If you heard that. And then when they asked grandmother, they thought, here comes this family story. And grandma says, "Well, I did it because my pan was small and the thing in there." And here's, it's been passed on from generation to generation. Why do we need to do that? Let's talk a little bit, because I think this whole thread of what we're talking about can beautifully intertwine into everything that you're going to be talking about today. But thinking specifically, acceptance is the antidote to overwhelm and burnout. What do you mean by that, and how does it relate to some of the things we've already been talking about today?
That's a really great question, because that took me, 40-something years to recognise, and, of a lot of fighting reality, I guess. So wanting to, be in charge and be in control. And I don't see being in control as a dirty word. I think, we all seek to have agency over what we do. So I think that's fine and that's okay. But I think what I realised is I was using a lot of unnecessary energy that I needed to raise my boys and build my business on fighting what was, my environment and my, situation of their dad living in China. So, doesn't see them because we're divorced, so doesn't see my kids anymore. Oh, yep. There's a book. And so realising that I was wasting all of this energy, precious energy, on fighting reality. So when we actually, and I discovered that when we actually accept our environment and who we are, then we can actually, build confidence in who we are and bring the best of who we are to everything to do. And in those moments when we're feeling like the pressure is just too much, we can access our like our mental clarity and our thoughts and our strategy, ways of building, coming up with strategies and processes. But if we're clouded by fighting, then it's not going to be a good outcome. And you know what? It actually, one of the biggest things that the biggest, I guess, impactful experiences was when I had my third son. So it took 3 pregnancies for me to not fight the process of labour. Because, accepting that this is pain, this is healthy pain, and it's going to go away, rather than, fighting. It's one of those messages we see on movies and, television programs, the dramatic element of that. And that's all fighting, what is. But going with it and accepting, it's going to hurt and it's painful, but there's going to be, another side to this, and it's going to be baby on the other side. Yeah. That really helped me too. So, so it's accepting rather than fighting.
Yeah. And as you're sharing that, I mean, some of the things, the experiences and the environments we may find ourselves, I think sometimes it is also looking at, well, what do we have control over? What areas can we impact? And then focusing on that rather than, as you said, so often we focus on things that we really can't control. Let's focus on the things that we can control. And as you said, often it is how we're reacting and how we're responding. Case in example, being in lockdown again. We cannot control that, but we certainly can control how it lets us, how it impacts us, how it affects us. What would you say, even in a workplace environment, whether we're running our own business or whether we're in corporate, there are always going to be circumstances. So if someone can see that they do react to the situation and it has been impacting them, what are some things that you did initially to help you stop, take check, and then be able to move forward in a better way? Let's share some insights so that some others can start to use some of those principles to help them to stop rather than reacting, but respond in a better, more empowering way.
Yeah, and this is crucial. I'm so glad you asked this question, because absolutely we can just respond in that situation. But what I found was really, really helpful is noticing our thoughts. So trying to create distance between how we're thinking and feeling and who we are. And maybe that sounds a little bit woo-woo sometimes, but just asking the question or just kind of narrating, I guess. I notice that I'm getting, that my stomach's getting in knots and I'm getting a headache. I notice that I'm getting tension in, my shoulders or my neck. I notice that I'm feeling blah, blah, blah. So creating that difference and kind of narrating how you're thinking, and then you're actually creating a distance between your thoughts and feelings and who you are. And then the bigger the distance that you can create, the more that you can detach from those emotions and those feelings, and the more that you can think and accept and then access your clarity. And I think that's been the biggest, most impactful exercise for me. And what that is it's a muscle build. So it doesn't mean you do it and then you're done. It's something that you've got to keep doing and building into a practice. And, I find I react sometimes. I've got a 14-year-old boy, I've got a teenager and a couple more on the way. And there's some really triggering and challenging moments. But if I set myself a goal, like if 1 out of 3 I can, respond rather than react, then I'm building that muscle. So it's creating distance between your thoughts and feelings and who you are, so that that you have, it's taking that observer sort of curiosity approach.
Yeah, brilliant. And once you do that, you're able then to take that breath, aren't you, and to look at things with a little bit more insight, I think. And also too, so often what ends up happening is when we are in that stress situation and we do feel that we can't control and we're really giving that voice, then secondary negative emotions and things can often happen. The shame, the anger, all of that, because I should be saying something like that and I should be able to do that. And then it just ends up just spiraling. So I love that. Distance yourself. And then from there, what can you do differently? What do you have control over? And even if it is, well, I can't control that, but I can change the way that I'm going to allow me myself to feel, and then from there move forward. Love that. Let's talk about being it being so crucial that we do build our self-knowledge data bank and work out what is the core of who we are. Would you say that we're getting to a stage where that's better now, or many of us still haven't really fully explored, built that self-knowledge data bank? Where are we on the scale of knowing really well and maybe having a little bit more journey to go on this?
I think that's a brilliant question, and what I would say is everyone's on that different point on the continuum. But if I was going to make an overall assumption, I would say that in general we are getting better. I think every generation gets better. I think we've talked a lot. We talk a lot in our general, I guess, narrative. A lot, not everyone, but about self-awareness and self-awareness, and the experts may argue with me here, but self-awareness is a really great skill to have, to reflect, to be curious and be self-aware. So I think we're getting there. But I think the next step to that is the self-awareness around who you are and building self-knowledge. I think that's kind of the action and the implementation, that will help you with the execution of strategy. So building a self-knowledge data bank or a database or whatever you want to call it. Because when you have the self-knowledge about, your strengths, your attributes, how you contribute and the value that you contribute to your family, to your business, to your community, to the world, when you use that self-knowledge data bank, you can use that as a place to come from. And when you understand what's at the core of who you are, so that really important thing that's important to you, and it may not be something in the external world, it may be something like courage, it may be hope, it may be growth, the thing that's really important to you, and knowing, how you use that and with your self-knowledge data bank, you can use that as like a platform and a compass to do everything. And that helps us to, then we're in every situation we find ourselves in, we know what we can tap into. And it goes back to a little bit of what you were saying earlier on, Anne-Marie, about looking at what we do have. So rather than seeing, the skills gap that we need to fill, and the interesting thing is the skills gap is probably, 5%, but what we do have is 90. So why not use that to bridge any, developmental or skills gaps, rather than just focusing on the skills gap, that tiny little gap. So the more that we know about ourselves and build that self-knowledge, the better we're able to face challenging situations, the better we're able to obtain flow, the better we're going to be able to show up in all of our relationships. So that's why it's important.
As you're sharing that, I'm reminded of many conversations that I had with people when I was working in the career space. And so often they'd come to me because they hated their job. And when I'd say, well, what specifically do you hate? I hate everything about my job. And I'd say, everything? Let's unpack that. And then we did go through and well, do you hate that? Well, actually, I do enjoy that. And we were able to narrow that down. But so often when we don't have that self-knowledge data bank, we're not able to recognize that there's certain environments that do cause us to be a little bit more overwhelmed and burned out because they're not a natural skill for us. And we have to adapt. And if we're over-adapting all the time, we can wear out and feel overwhelmed. We can also look at our colleagues or people working in other businesses, similar businesses at us, and admire them. But that admiration can turn into comparison. And as we know, comparison can cripple, particularly if we haven't recognized the gifts, the talents, the skills, the strengths, that we have. What would you say to someone that can recognize that they have not really built up that self-knowledge data bank? Where's a good place to start?
That's a great question. I think that there are some really easy ways to step into this, by yourself, without the help of a coach or an advocate or someone else, like an external person. You can start just by doing those strength surveys, like those online strength surveys. So Gallup has one, VIA strength surveys have one, and this is if you're really at the starting point. So understanding more about your strengths and getting a little bit of insight into those. Some organisations conduct fantastic strengths, surveys or programs. So I always, and it's funny, I think it's the hope and the Pollyanna in me. I always like to start with what's working well. So what's working really well? So the online surveys, asking yourself questions like, when I'm doing, X, like my favorite thing, how am I feeling? What's going on for me? What is it about that thing that I love? I guess, and asking questions. To be honest, the best way is to have someone else asking you questions. If you don't have experience in this area, it's just tiny, like, foundational things. So start off with your strengths and looking at what you do well in all your roles. I think that's, and then asking why. What is that? What's that linked to? Like you mentioned, drilling down and unpacking it a little bit more, and understanding, just kind of it. And you know what? It is a process, because for me, I actually thought that what was at the core of who I was health and well-being. That was the most important thing to me. But then after speaking to other women and doing this research project and keeping on drilling down, I found that it was growth. And the interesting thing is, I find that a lot of people that I work with, a lot of high achieving women, high performing women, lifelong learners, that's usually what's at the heart of who they are, growth. And then you can see in everything they do how they're coming from that core, that internal compass of growth. So it might be being on a committee for something. It may be taking on extra in their corporation. It might be doing more courses for their business, or doing something like this, podcasts, and but it's all because of that what's at the heart of them and the core of them is around growth. And when you know that, you can accept yourself and what you do a lot more easily.
And I love that you've shared that, because you can imagine then, if someone who is really what motivates them at the core is growth, one of the reasons why they may start to feel that even their business or in their work, if they're in corporate, starting to feel a bit lackluster, and the excitement, motivation is not there as it was previously, maybe that's because opportunities of growth and learning are just not there anymore. And once we know, we can then start to invite those. We can say, hey, I would love to learn more. What can I learn? Where can I grow? These are all really important. Look, this brings us to the last point that you're wanting to talk about today, Danielle, and that is where you say our most valuable asset is not our time, but our energy. And that fits beautifully into what we were just talking about, energy. Can you describe what you mean about energy, and then what are some things we need to know about this?
This is great. This was a real eye-opener for me when I understood this. So in between everything else I did, I was a personal trainer for a little bit, and I was working with women who, when we're living here in Australia, but also in Beijing, and I noticed these high-performing expat women who were working at embassies. They were partners of accounting firms. They were doing all these incredible things. But they weren't committing to regular exercise as much as they wanted. They weren't eating all that well. They were, working a lot. And I was really curious about it, because the equation approach of, calories in, exercise, sleep and recovery, all those things you learn about, they just weren't applying to these women. They were still achieving incredible things. And so I looked deeper into it. And I went and looked at the, traditional, Chinese ways of Taoism, and looking at how we approach life and being in sync with nature. And this opened up a whole can of worms around, and this whole other way of looking at energy. Because if we look at every single thing, if you just take a leap and come along with me, okay, with this next bit. But if you look at everything that happens in our body, every single thing takes energy. Every single cell creation, every single, movement. And if we think about that in terms of our thoughts as well, so every single thought takes energy from our body. We need energy to have thoughts, to have emotions. So if we're using our energy on, a thought around, I did a really crap job at that, we need to assert an opposing and opposite thought. Oh no, I did okay. And that takes energy too to get to some sort of middle ground. So understanding that every single thing that we do, every thought, every emotion, everything in our body takes energy, it's much easier to think about, how am I going to use that wisely? And am I going to do things and think things that fuel my energy? Or am I going to do things that drain my energy? And I guess for me, with all of my responsibilities and having to or wanting to fit everything in the day, energy is where I start. So even conversations with people, is that conversation going to drain my energy, or is it going to give me energy? Because I need every little bit of energy that I've got to do what I need to do. So coming from, and then it becomes less about time and a scarcity things, because energy, it does deplete if you don't renew it. But if you're doing things that are fueling your energy, you can keep the energy, the battery bigger. So.
And I think people, well, I'm hoping that people are more aware of this now. I mean, again, drawing back from the career space, one of the certifications that I needed to study was MBTI, Myers-Briggs type. You realise that there are introverts and extroverts. People often think it's to do with shyness, and there may be that introverts are a little bit more hesitant in stepping forward, but that's because we're analysing what's going on, and we know our place to how we can contribute. We don't just, I better just keep my mouth shut before I bend. But anyway, where that really plays is energy in and energy out. And introverts, and I'm an extroverted introvert. In front of a microphone, I'm fine. But there's a level of energy, and then like this is the last interview, and when I finish, I'll be hand signing to my family. I've done my quota for the week. But I have to be mindful about where I'm recuperating my energy, and I think that's what you're saying too. There is a finite amount of energy that we have every day. Are we continuing to surround ourselves, put ourselves in environments, in situations that will continue to energize us? And there may be some expending of energy for certain tasks, but are we also putting that energy in and energy out? Would you say that we still want, once we realize that, we're going to be far more mindful of the things that we do, we say yes to, the activities that we, that we say yes to, when we start to think more about, is this going to energize me and give me time to be able to recoup, if we compare it to just looking at a time equation?
Absolutely. And actually, there's an exercise in my book, perfect for exactly your question. It was adapted from Rich Litvin. He's a coach in the US. And he came up with this very simple exercise. So you get a sheet of paper, you've got 3 columns, and you think about people, places, habits, thoughts, language that give you energy, that drain your energy, and then that are neutral. So what gives you energy? What gives you energy on the right, what drains your energy on the left, and all the other things that are neutral. And then you go through all that process of thinking of people, places, habits, thoughts, language, and write them down in the column that they apply to for your life. And then things that are neutral in the middle, you want to get them to either a drain or fuel. And that's I did this practice for over a couple of weeks, and it's a really great way to understand and just have a think about where you're putting your energy in general, and then what the effects of that, whether it's draining you or giving you energy, or if it's just neutral. So it really helps with that awareness around where your energy is going.
Yeah. And I love that Raymond is here. Says, yes, 100%. As we have finite energy, our thoughts, and more importantly, the quality of our thoughts, are imperative in maintaining good energy levels. Absolutely. Keep up the great work, both. Yeah, you too, David. Thanks for contributing that. One of the things that I think is, not just think, I know, is so empowering, has been for me, is when we recognize and have that self-knowledge bank. Because if we have a look at some people who've got high levels of energy when they get in front of, and they can speak to people, and I call it peopling, and when the quota is like 1,000%. If I look at that, and I do admire that. But if I looked at it from a scarcity, I wish I could do that, then you're actually inhibiting and you're denying the gifts and talents that we have more as introverts. And I think it's so good to have these conversations because we recognize that we all bring different styles, different mannerisms, different characteristics, different levels of where we excel, and that
Oops.
absolutely. See, your dog is getting in on the conversation. Yes. It's true. But I love that exercise about energy in, energy out, and what's neutral. So would you say, is there an equation that he gives then, Danielle, to say, well, look, X percent, don't over, the energy out, only have so much percent of those during your day or week? Does he give kind of insights into that, what we should be aiming for?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, the dog's still barking. Don't you love that? This is live. We're going live, by the way, and whatever happens, happens. But I can see that her dog there was barking quite loud, so she may be removing him or her and then coming back and sharing that. By the way, if anyone is listening or watching this and has anything to contribute, share a message in the comment and I'll bring that up as well. Here she is.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. My dog's, she's a bit
All right.
strange. She's just had her operation, so.
Yeah, was there a percentage on that? We're nearly at the end of the show, so I was just querying, like, should we, have don't have any more than X percent of energy draining tasks for you during the day, and just a bit of a quota to aim for. Oh, the dog's going there. We may have to get her to look that up and then leave it in the comments. We'll try one more time. You've got to love live podcasting, live streaming.
Sorry, yeah, she's just not giving up here. Vivi, sorry.
Actually, what I'm going to do is while she's doing that, let me get up her website. Danielle, do you want to just type in the comments there? Actually, I don't know if you can. I'll get it up. We're just going to share a little bit about your website so that people can get in contact with you. What's the best way that they can get in contact with you as well? And then we can get them to actually, here's your website, Code Conversations. Let me bring that up. And hopefully by that time, your little pooch will have settled down a little bit. But if not, that's okay. This is live streaming. We go with the flow.
There we go. I think she's a bit better. Yeah, sorry about that. She's
No,
just had
that is fine. I know what that's like. I had a little one not so long ago.
Yeah, so that was a really great question. I hadn't actually really thought about that, Anne-Marie, about percentage. And I think it's going to actually depend on each individual person, because some people might need a lot more, like you mentioned before about extroverts, they might need a lot more of the fueling energy to keep them motivated and engaged. Whereas other people who have an approach where it's, a slow build process, they're okay with routine and doing one thing after another, then they're probably not going to need as much of the higher energy.
Yeah, that's good. Great pick up there. So be mindful. Let's all create that list. What really fuels our souls, what drains it, and what's some of the neutral on that. That's a good thing. I'm going to do that myself. So here is your website, codeconversations.com.au. That is how we can get in touch with you. But share a little bit of, if your little one's not there adding to the conversation, share a little bit more about what you do, the work you do, your ideal client, all of that good stuff.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that. So what I do is I work with women in business and in corporate to understand the impact of the gender code on their lives, in their work, in their communities, and in their families. And we do that through like coaching, speaking, workshops, and development programs. And then also work with organisations to understand the impact of the gender code in their business. so that they can leverage the power of the high-performing women they already have and attract the right women into their organisation and build their brand and help their culture go from good to great. So I do that also with development programs, speaking presentations for men and women, with senior leadership teams and other teams like leadership teams and individual leaders. So it's a really incredible and rewarding way of bringing more gender balance to not just workplaces, but people who take this home into their families and also into their communities.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many studies that have been done worldwide about how, when we get a diverse people around a boardroom discussions, we bring diverse ideas, and it's very difficult to get that diversity, especially innovation now, which we need to move forward. How can we be more innovative when it comes to economy, so that we're not so reliant on areas that have now been completely impacted and really challenged with what we're faced globally, when we don't have those contributions, diversity around that table. I think we only get half the story in times, and when we don't get that brain space contributing, it can't lead us to places and spaces and thoughts and ideas that we would never have been able to do had we kept doing the same thing, same old. It's time to start breaking the code. So love that you've come on the show, Danielle. Would there be one last insight that you would want to share with people today before we finish up?
I would say question everything. Just question everything. And try and understand, what is, the code that I'm living by right now, and ask if it makes sense anymore. And if it doesn't, then you can make choices. You can decide whether you want to keep parts of the code that you value and love, and that there might be parts that you want to delete. And then there's new parts of a code you want to create. And when you become learn how to write code in your own code, you can write and execute your own unique code that works for you.
Well, here's to writing your own unique code. Because I think once you do, you actually contribute even more impactfully and more in a much more empowering way, don't you, to your community, which is wonderful. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Sorry about the dog bit, but yeah, it was really, really great, really excellent to speak to you.
Luckily, it was at the end of the conversation, so
Yeah.
Lots of great insights shared. And he is it a he or a she?
She
wanted to contribute to the conversation too, so she had her voice heard too. So there we go. All right, Danielle, thanks once again, and we'll look forward to sharing this with our community once the audio goes live too. So thanks once again.
Okay, thanks, Anne-Marie. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by theinfluencealliance.com. Want to influence real change with your message by becoming known as a trusted authority in your industry while building a sustainable and scalable business you love? Find out how by accessing our free podcast series at www.theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series. That's theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series.